Welcome back to more of the Eden of Grisaia. In the last episode, Shihara met with JB, who was currently incarcerated, but she left a note, a secret note, detailing where Yuji was going to be taken. What she does with this information is not yet clear, but now we're at Yuji's perspective here. 15 minutes had passed since breakfast. The food here wasn't good, but it wasn't bad either. It was mostly just tasteless. Now that Yuji had been reunited with the national defense system that called itself his sister, he was aware that the surveillance cameras and microphones in the ceiling of his cell were essentially Kazuki's eyes, ears, and mouth. A little creepy, but... well, physical distance was irrelevant to her now. No matter where her body might be, she was present anywhere her eyes could see. Temporal and spatial limitations no longer applied. She could be in multiple places simultaneously if the situation called for it. At any given moment, Kazuki might be watching a street corner, exploring a public facility, or using a webcam to peek inside a private home. You basically couldn't turn around without bumping into her. Of course, the idea of an invisible army of Kazukis lurking all over the place was somewhat unsettling. Just a little bit. But she'd always been something of a god to Yuji. So the idea of her always watching over him always seemed like a natural development. When you're locked up in a cell all day against your will, you tend to have a good deal of time on your hands, and siblings who haven't seen each other in years always have plenty of catching up to do. In particular, Kazuki was very interested in hearing about how her brother had gotten by following her abrupt disappearance. My laugh after you disappeared was, well, pretty much how I described it in the documents. Now that I think about it, I guess this explains why they ordered me to write such a detailed report. You were behind that, weren't you? You never changed, Kazuki. Now, back when we were kids, you used to interrogate me about my day the minute I got home from school.
それはあなたが私の預かり知らないところで私の知らない女の子と人には言えないようなことをするからでしょ
What are you even talking about?
堀内奏、大橋弘子、小田彩菜。私が確認しているだけで少なくとも3人は女の子の友達がいたわ。
What, I can't have friends?
しかも堀内奏とは結婚式ごっこと称した時期でキスまで許したわよね。あの子とあの子の家族が今どこで何をしているか知りたい？
Do I want to know? Thanks anyway, but I don't really think so. Look, forget about me. Why'd you end up like this, Kazuki?
ユージはどこまで知っているの？
Well, you were in an accident on the way back from your training camp and got stranded in the mountains. Only Amane survived in the end. Amane told me what happened from her perspective, but I don't know much apart from that.
そうね。それじゃあ、私が天音と別れてから先の話をしましょうか。
It was the night of our escape attempt. After convincing Amane to run off by herself, I was easily pinned to the ground by Kanade-senpai, who had pursued us through the woods. Straddling my body as she pressed me into the dirt, Kanade focused her attention on my right hand, which held the knife I'd taken from Amane. She pushed down on my right arm with an unbelievable amount of force, while Koide-senpai mobilized my fractured left arm.
なんで逃げるんだよ。話し合えばわかるって言ってんじゃん。
She had the eyes of a starving dog. The smile on her face was a twisted, hollow thing. The corners of her mouth were wet with frothy spittle. From all the appearances, Kanade-senpai was now governed entirely by her impulses. She hadn't decided to catch me. I was running, so she instinctively given chase. Koide-ritsu, for her part, was clearly terrified. When you grow too accustomed to being ordered around, you lose the ability to take independent actions. Unless you stay in line and cooperate with the group, there's always a risk to turn on you next. That fear was probably what had made Koide-senpai act more than anything else. One of my captors was incapable of coherent thought. The other was a coward who couldn't bring herself to ignore a crossing signal. They'd caught me, but that didn't mean they were going to do anything to me. Not just yet, anyway. A few seconds had passed, and while they had me at their mercy, they obviously weren't sure what to do with me. One of them was governed by instinct, the other by fear. Under these circumstances, fear would be easier to manipulate. I turned my head toward Koide, who was holding my left arm.
痛いわ、小出さん。話してちょうだい。
Keeping my voice utterly calm, I addressed her in a low, menacing tone.
聞こえないの？ならもう一度だけ言うわ。話しなさい、りっちゃん。
Once you've learned to fear something, or someone, that fear tends to stick with you. I could feel Koide-senpai's grip weakening slightly.
ほら、話すなよ。
そんなにムキにならなくても逃げやしないわよ。ほら、包丁も捨てるわ。手を離しなさい、りっちゃん。怒るわよ。
The words right and wrong held no meaning here. No one knew how to obey, no one knew what to do. In this valley, the law of the jungle was in full effect. Brute strength was all that counted now. But even so, Koide Ritsu was afraid of me. My arm was fractured. I was lying face down in the dirt, utterly helpless. But even so, the idea of antagonizing me terrified her. An intelligent woman can be far more frightening than a physically powerful one. Koide-senpai had spent too much time being pushed around by other people. Her terror of me wasn't rational. I imagine it came to her reflexively.
りっちゃん。
Quietly speaking Koide-senpai's name was enough to fuel her fear. A part of her mind was screaming to apologize now while she still had the chance. The next words out of my mouth would be decisive.
あなた、私がいなくても生きていけるの？
Koide-senpai had spent most of her young life standing submissively at the side of stronger people. Over the years, she'd internalized certain rules. The way I was treating her set off alarm bells inside her head. Her instincts were telling her not to defy me. Before she even knew it, Koide-senpai jerked her hands away from my left arm. I didn't let the chance pass me by. With all my strength, I swung my partially fractured arm up, punching Kaede square on the nose. As Kanade reached up to stop the blood now flowing from her nose, I tried to push her off of me. But it wasn't as if I had much strength left. And more importantly, I just hit her as hard as I could with my injured arm. It hurt so badly that I wanted to cry.
今ので完全に折れちゃったかも。
Enraged by the pain I'd inflicted on her, Kanade-senpai bellowed my name furiously. Now that I'd angered her, she'd probably kill me without a second thought. If I wept and apologized, would she forgive me? It didn't seem particularly likely. I tried to lay a bit of groundwork for when worse came to worse, but honestly, it appeared that my luck had simply run out. And just as I was beginning to resign myself to my fate, another of my pursuers arrived on the scene.
待ちなよ、金田。風見は殺しちゃダメだ。
Sakuma-senpai had emerged silently from the darkness behind Kanade. None of us had noticed her approach.
殺す？私が？風見を？なんで？別に殺しゃしないよ。なら、風見を捕まえてどうするつもりだい？
Taking a shaky step forward on her unnourished legs, Sakuma placed a hand on Kaneda's shoulder and pulled. Kaneda slowly turned her head to look up at her.
死ぬのを待つんだよ。
Her right eye was all but useless. Her left glistened like a pool of oil. Her face had contorted itself into the slack, deranged smile of a woman who had given up entirely on life. Had she not fallen low enough to kill living people in order to eat them? Or had she simply realized that most of my body would go to waste if she killed me now? Whatever the case, she clearly hadn't come to her senses.
とにかく落ち着きなよ、金田。ねえ、風見。情けない話だけれど、私たちは君がいないと全員死んでしまうんだ。そのことを君は十分に分かっているし、そうなるように仕向けてきたんだと思うけど、こんな状況で空腹だの治療不足だのと言ってもどうにもならない。この状況で何より怖いのは無気力だ。死んだ方がマシだと思えるような状況の中にあって、それでも風見がいればまだなんとかなるかもしれないという小さな希望が持てる。たとえどんなに小さくても 希望さえあれば、私たちはまだもう少しだけ生きていられるような気がするんだ。君が残ってくれると約束してくれるのなら、私たちも天音を追いかけることはしないって約束するよ。
あなたに約束していただくことにどんな意味が？
坂下には私が言って聞かせるよ。信じてほしい。
We were well past the point of talking things over like human beings. Did this girl really not understand the nature of our situation? Before I could respond to Sakuma's offer, Captain Sakashita came running up to us, now dressed in her school uniform.
風見さんを捕まえたのね。スオさんはどうしたの？
逃げられたよ。
何をしているの？早く追いかけて殺して！生かしておけば私たちは終わりなのよ。
Should Amane successfully make her way off this mountain, the events that had taken place here would be exposed. In other words, Sakashita's spotless life would be stained with an indelible disgrace. That was something she could not allow to happen.
坂下。
Hasn't this gone on long enough? With those words on the tip of her tongue, Sakuma turned to look at Captain Sakashita and found that her gaunt face was filled with something like vigor.
坂下。君、また。
Sakashita's body jerked at the question. Her eyes found Sakuma's face, pallid and shallow, and swollen, in stark contrast to her own.
違うわ。これはだって私が倒れたら。
Okay, for those of you who don't quite know what's going on, if you kind of missed this, what happened is they got trapped down here after the bus kind of fell off a cliff, and they have no way to get out of the forest because they have no idea where to go. They have no communication, and they've basically been starving to death. And some people have resumed to cannibalism to eat the dead. If Captain Sakashita were to be rendered immobile, there would be no one to procure and distribute the food. It was a fact that she essentially kept the group alive for the last few days. Everyone here understood that, and so no one said anything more. But that very silence filled Captain Sakashita's chest with agony and sent blood rushing to her head. Her own desperate search for an excuse brought her nothing but unendurable shame. I'm not in the wrong. There was no other way. What gives her the right to judge me for doing what I had to be done? Why is she making it sound like I'm some kind of selfish monster? As these thoughts ran through Sakashita's mind, the ball of stress that had built up deep inside her since the day of the accident abruptly exploded.
あなたには言われたくない!
Sakuma had never done anything on her own. She'd always just gone with the flow. She'd eaten the food they found under clearly suspicious circumstances, and now she was criticizing Sakashita for her actions. It was the last straw. Sakuma Minori had always been this way. She was irresponsible and lazy, but always managed to say the right thing. She never did anything useful, but the younger girls always loved her anyway. Why did everyone always fall for this useless girl's nonsense? The resentful thoughts bubbling up inside Sakashita were intensified by her volatile emotional state. In a blind, unthinkable rage, she snatched a knife from my hand and stabbed it violently into Sakuma's stomach. Oh my god. At first, Sakuma didn't even understand what had happened. Something cold had pushed its way deep inside her stomach. By the time she realized it was a knife, the grass at her feet was already glistening with her dark red blood. Wow. Losing control of herself entirely, Koide-senpai began to shriek at the top of her lungs. Still clutching at my broken arm, all I could do was look on in silence, beads of cold sweat trickling down my back. At last, we crossed the final line. The violent urges we managed to suppress thus far could no longer be controlled. What else could you do but laugh?
坂下。もういいんだよ。
Sakuma took a half step backward, The knife in Captain Sakashida's hand slipped cleanly from her stomach, its blade drenched with blood.
いいんだ。
Blood poured steadily from the gash in Sakuma Senpai's abdomen, and like air escaping from a punctured balloon, the strength drained from her body. That's it. I'm not going to survive this one. The moment that realization hit her, Sakuma swayed heavily backward. Having offered Sakashida her forgiveness, a beatific expression of relief spread across her face. And she collapsed to the ground.
小出さん、止血を。ボケっとしないで、急いで。
Jumping at the sound of my voice, Koide-senpai hurried to Sakuma's side, but the wound was so large that she hesitated, not knowing what to do.
私の上からどいて、この状況がわからないの？
With an angry shout at Koide-senpai, I managed to shove her off of me, and then rushed over to where Sakuma had fallen.
佐久間先輩、お気を確かに。
Removing my broken arm from its sling, I slipped the cloth off my shoulder and brought it to Sakuma Senpai's injured abdomen. But no matter how much pressure I applied, the blood would not stop flowing.
違う。私が悪いんじゃない。だって、佐久間が私のせいじゃない。
Captain Sakashida was mumbling incoherently toward the bloody knife in her hand, but no one was paying her any heed. In the midst of this chaos, I heard someone approaching through the forest.
熊先輩。ねえ。熊先輩。
Stumbling her way noisily through the underbrush, Ibuki Haruna appeared before us. She looked around the area with glassy eyes, spotted Sakuma Senpai lying in the grass, and slowly squatted down next to her.
ああ、いた。急にいなくなったら心配するじゃないですか。こんなとこで寝てたら死んじゃいますよ。
Ibuki's tone of voice was cheerful, even carefree. The rest of us were stunned into silence. I don't think I'd ever been at such an utter loss for words before.
っていうか、もう死んじゃってます？
Her abdomen was bleeding profusely even as we spoke. Anyone could see at a glance that there was simply nothing to be done.
ねえ先輩、熊先輩、これってどういうこと？だってずっと一緒にいてくれるって約束してくれたじゃないですか。なのに、なんで勝手に死んじゃうんです？全然意味わかんないし、先に死んじゃうとか、それってずるくないですか？ねえ先輩、先輩いなくなっちゃったら、私、明日から誰に髪を切ってもらえばいいんですか？
Naturally, Sakuma did not respond. She no longer could.
だから言ったじゃないですか。善人なんて最後はみんないいように利用されて死んじゃうんですよ。だから善人なんか嫌いなんですよ、私は。
Turning her attention from Sakuma's wound, Ibuki now looked around the clearing, finally spotting Captain Sakashida, standing frozen with the bloody knife in her hand. Ibuki's dreamy expression vanished in an instant as her face contorted with rage. Screaming like a madwoman, she pulled a pair of scissors from her skirt pocket, charged at Captain Sakashida, and stabbed them into her.
お前は死ね死んでクマ先輩に謝れ土下座して謝る
With a raspy little gurgle, Sakashita fell to the ground, blood trickling from her mouth.
許さない許さない許さない土下座しても許さない死んでも絶対に許さない
Overcome by anger and grief, Ibuki pushed Sakashita into the dirt, straddled her, and stabbed the scissors into her body again and again. Whenever Ibuki's bangs grew long enough to be bothersome, Sakuma had cut them for her. The scissors she'd used for that purpose were now covered in blood. Even as she screamed, even as she wept, Ibuki did not stop plunging the bloody scissors into Sakashita's body. Every blow was an expression of her hatred for the cruel and vicious world in which we lived. It was at this moment that Mr. Ochi finally arrived at the clearing. At the sight of this horrifying spectacle, he stopped dead in his tracks.
やめろ。何をしているんだ。やめろ。やめるんだ。
In a place that was already as hellish as this, what was the point of murdering each other? Didn't make any sense. Mr. Ochi moved on pure reflex, thinking only that he had to stop the brutal assault that was taking place. Looking quickly around the area, he grabbed a volleyball-sized rock from the ground with both hands, lifted it up, and brought it down violently on Ibuki's head. With a heavy thunk, the rock caved in Ibuki's skull. The impact knocked her head down between her shoulders. She slid out of Sakashita and fell on her side, still clutching to the scissors in her hand. The disaster had unfolded in what felt like an instant. Before we could even try to prevent it, Koide-senpai fell on her backside and lost control of her bladder. Her fragile mind had finally broken. All color drained from the world, leaving only ugly shades of gray. Everything was warped, everything was twisted. No one could keep the madness from spreading. Ibuki's lifeless eyes were fixed resentfully on Mr. Ochi. Even now that she was unconscious, they glittered in the moonlight, as if burning with unspeakable hatred. Faced with the consequence of this impulsive, emotional action, Mr. Ochi stood stock still, his face full of shock and horror.
俺はなんてことを。いいぞいいぞ、もっと殺し合え。こいつはいいや。
Koide-senpai's cruel, deranged laughter forced its way through our ears and echoed inside our minds. We were past the point of no return. As that fact finally sank in, Mr. Ochi's legs gave out beneath him.
だから、これだから、女の喧嘩に巻き込まれるのは嫌なんだ。いつだって、こんな結果になる。
With every word he spoke, Ochi's body tilted further to the side. Perhaps he was trying to stay upright as the world lurched around him. I can't take this anymore. What does it even matter? What's the point of living through all this suffering? Ochi's job was to serve as an example for his students, to offer them hope as they struggled through the anxieties of youth. Over the years, he'd begun to hold something like pride in his occupation. But now that he'd crossed this final line, that thin strand of strength gave way, and he was left with nothing. And yet, it didn't matter if everyone had given up. It didn't matter how desperate our situation had become. I was going to do everything I could, no matter what. I'd spent years teaching my brother to do the same. After all, I might die in his place, but I wasn't going to die a hypocrite. Hurrying to Captain Sakashita's side, I desperately applied pressure to her wounds.
大丈夫。傷はそんなに深くない。
数は多いけどまだ助かるわ。小出さん、手伝って。
With only the use of my right hand, I couldn't possibly stop the bleeding from all of Sakashida's countless wounds. I called for her help, but Koide Senpai's fear had given way to despair. She didn't even move.
ありがとう。もういいわ。
Sakashida's voice was raspy and faint. As if to refuse my attempts at treatment, she reached up and grasped my
あ
arm.
なたの言う通りよ。風見さん、ここまで落ちてしまえば私はもう戻れない。諦めてはダメよ。生きてさえいれば必ずなんとかなるから。
Sakashida responded to this rather inept attempt at encouragement by shaking her head slowly.
あとはあなたに全部お任せするわ。坂下さん。
Why had it come to this? None of it was anyone's fault. So how had everything gone so wrong? That unanswerable question echoed heavily in all of our hearts. Sakaki Minori died from shock and massive bloodlust as a result of a laceration to her abdomen. Harune Ibuki suffered an open, depressed skull fracture as a result of a blow to her head. 2 hours later, she died from cerebral contusion. Sakashida Chiaki had numerous puncture wounds all over her body. Fortunately, the weapon she'd been stabbed with was a pair of craft scissors, so the lacerations were fairly shallow. We stitched up her wounds, but her loss of blood left her in critical condition. Kanede Saya received a broken nose as a result of a blow to her face. By pushing my little finger into her nose, I repositioned the broken bone from within, then filled her nostrils with cotton to prevent further bleeding. As for Kazami Kazuki, of course of punching Kanede Saya in the face, I'd managed to completely break my partially fractured left arm. After setting the bone myself, I fixed it in position using a wooden splint. By now, the only uninjured members of the group were Koide Ritsu and our teacher, Uchiyushi Hiko. Neither of them were in particularly good shape either, of course, but somewhat surprisingly, Koide proved to be the more mentally stable of the two. I suppose her ability to adapt to her environment made her somewhat resilient in the face of adversity. About an hour after the incident, she stopped staring blankly into space and asked me if there was anything she could do to help. By the time we'd completed emergency first aid and carried the wounded back to their tents, the sun was already rising. On the verge of unconsciousness, Captain Sakashida told me the location of the food she'd hidden away and left its management in my hands.
どうやらここに埋めてあるみたいね。
千秋さん、こんなところに隠してたんだ。
やっぱりね、絶対に隠してると思ってたんだ。あの女、独り占めするつもりだったんだ。
それは違うと思うわよ。
なんでさ、この場所先生だって知らなかったんだよ。
もし独り占めするつもりだったのなら、もうとっくに食べちゃってるわよ。
だったらどうして？
これはきっといよいよ最後という時に配給するつもりだったのね。誰だって最後ぐらい白いお米を食べてから死にたいでしょ。
それで死んじゃったら意味ないじゃん。食べずに我慢できる時期なんかとっくの昔に終わってたんだし、さっさと出すべきだったんだよ。
あなただったら出した？
私なら埋めたりしないでとっとと一人で食べちゃうね。
でしょうね。
つかさ、いつの間にかタメ口だよね、風見。
先輩というだけで尊敬しろと言われても。
なに？ほんと生意気なやつだな。
ありました。クーラーボックス出てきました。
よしどけ、あとは私がやる。
ダメよ、食料は私が管理します。
うっせんだよ。そうやって今度はあんたが独り占めするつもりだろ。
もうやめて。私そうやって争うならこの食べ物は全部捨てます。
バカやめろ。
金田先輩。
痛い。
What happened?
金田
After briefly crouching down and grabbing her head, Kaneda-senpai suddenly arched her neck backward and began rubbing the back of her skull against the ground. This bizarre outburst certainly didn't seem to be some kind of ploy to distract us from the food.
風見さん、どうしよう。
金田さん、聞こえる？どこがどんな風に痛いの？痛い！頭が痛い！内側から破裂する！助けてよ！頭？
It looked as if she was instinctively trying to lower the position of her head.
小出さん、金田さんの体を上から押さえて暴れさせないように。
Either she was trying to find a position that would lessen her agony somewhat, or her movements were involuntary, the result of something badly wrong with her head.
動かないで。
As Koide held Kaneda's convulsing body still, I reached into her nostrils and pulled out the cotton I'd stuffed in them. As soon as I unblocked her nose, a large amount of blood began to flow from it.
小出さん、靴下を脱いで。吸水性の高い白い布がいるの。急いで。
I took the sock and pressed it against Kanade-senpai's nose. Her nosebleed showed no signs of stopping. The stain that appeared on the sock was right at the center, but its outer edges were a light yellow.
一見鼻血だけど、血以外の体液も大量に混ざってる。
There were all sorts of illnesses that could cause those symptoms, but given that she'd been in a bus accident and a brawl,
どうしよう。しかない先輩と同じ症状だよ。
とにかくテントに運びましょう。ここでは何もできないわ。
わかった。
on the day of the accident itself, Shikanai-senpai had suffered a fracture on the base of her skull. While she was conscious, immediately afterwards, she rolled herself into a ball, moaning while clutching her head, just like Kanade was doing now. She died 10 minutes later. Kanai-senpai, who'd bled from both her ears and her nose, had probably died as a result of the damage to her skull. At this rate, Kanade would suffer the same fate.
すみません、金田先輩。おそらくはバス転落時の頭部損傷の時点で何らかのトラブルを抱えていたんだとは思いますが。
そっか。それも仕方ないよね。まあ、そういうこともあるさ。で、私、いつ死ぬのかな。
わかりません。10分後に死んでしまう可能性もありますし、感染症さえ起こさなければ自然に治る可能性もあります。
どうせ死ぬなら早く死んで、さっさと楽になりたいな。
まだ諦めないでくださ
い。ねえ、風見。私、死ぬ前に白いご飯が食べたいな。
そうおっしゃるだろうと思って、今小出さんにお米を炊いてもらっています。とは言っても、埋められていたクーラーボックスから出てきたお米は2合程度です。
最後の食事としては上等かな。
まずは薄いお粥から体をなじませていきましょう。
せっかくだし、普通に炊いたご飯がいい。
もう何日もまともな食事をしていません。固形物を急にたくさん食べると消化不良を起こしますよ。
When she's on death's door, she probably doesn't care much about indigestion at this point.
そういうもの？
消化能力が落ちているので、食べても胃が受け付けずに吐き戻してしまいます。戦時中には物資輸送を断たれて食料に貧困した島から撤退した兵隊が、軍医が止めるのも聞かずに隠れて食事を大食いして何人も死んだそうですよ。
そんな死に方は苦しいだろうな。
ですから少しずつ慣らしていきましょう。もうすぐお粥が炊き上がるはずです。
そういえば小出遅いね。あいつ一人で全部食っちゃってるんじゃないよね。
小出さんにも同じように消化不良の話はしましたし、それはないと思いますけど。そうですね。
他の人たちも気になりますし、少し様子を見に行ってきます。
Even in a situation like this, I want to believe that we still had some shred of rationality left. Koide was an unusually cowardly young woman. I assumed that telling her "you'll die if you eat" would keep her from doing anything reckless. It was a naive assumption on my part. In front of the primitive cooking furnace we built by piling up stones, I found Koide-san lying on the ground with her arms around her stomach. At her side there was a single metal mess kit full of steaming white rice that looked freshly cooked. Most likely the process of cleaning and cooking the precious food we discovered in the cooler had been too much for her to bear. As soon as the fluffy white rice was ready, she shoveled handfuls of it in her mouth, only to have her weakened digestive system reject it.
だからあれほど警告したのに。
ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。
There was blood in the vomit leaving her mouth.
テントまで運んであげたいけれど、腕を骨折していてそれもできないの。ごめんなさい。自分の足で立ち上がってテント。ごめんなさい。許して。
From the look of things, her stomach wouldn't be capable of accepting anything at all for some time. If we could hook her up to an IV drip, things might be different. But given her already weakened state, it looked like a potentially fatal problem. Picking up the mess kit with the rice Koide-san had prepared, I headed for the tent where Captain Sakashita was lying. Our prompt first aid efforts had apparently been effective. Her blood pressure had recovered and she now regained consciousness. I placed the mess kit next to Sakashita's pillow and gave her a brief update on everyone's condition. She listened quietly, offering only brief responses.
そう。ということは、もう立って歩けるのは、あなたと先生だけになってしまったわね。
私もいつまで持つかはわかりません。
I was still lucid for now, but breaking my left arm completely had led to intermittent fevers. If my body lost the ability to generate those fevers, I might very well lose consciousness and never wake up again.
もう現状で頼りになるのは越智先生だけですが、その先生は一人にしてくれと言ったきり、一度も姿を見かけていません。
きっと彼はお墓にいるわ。あの人は一人にしてはダメよ。
私に彼を止めろと。
心配ないわ。お墓にいると言っても、あなたが危惧しているような現場に。
わかりました。様子を見に行ってきます。
お願いするわ。
What if I found that Mr. Oshi probably committed suicide?
この飯盒は置いていきます。お粥ですから食べられるようなら食べてください。
私はいいわ。あなたが食べなさい。
別に私の分をあなたにあげると言っているわけじゃありません。私の分はちゃんと別に用意してあります。
どうせ私はもうすぐ死ぬわ。すぐに死ぬ人間に与える食事は。
動ける人間の食事を増やしたところで、結局は限られた食料をただ消費するだけの現状です。すべてを食べ尽くしてしまえば全員死にます。であれば、たとえすぐに死ぬと分かっている傷病者であっても、食事は平等であるべきだと私は思います。
そう。こんな状況でも意見は変わらないのね。分かったわ。でも今はとても眠いの。後で目を覚ました時にいただくわ。
お大事に。
How exactly was she supposed to take care of herself under these circumstances? If you'd asked me, I wouldn't have been able to reply. Still, the fact that she could hold a coherent conversation was a positive sign. She probably wouldn't die for another 2 days or so. By this point, I was keeping a running count of how long everyone had to live, as if I were some angel of death. Alrighty, well with that, I think I'm going to end the video off here, and we'll finish this off on Monday. So, have a good weekend everybody, and I will see you then.